Breaking news tonight. Canadians detained in Ethiopia. The group of volunteers and workers being held and the allegations against them. Canada's newest COVID-19 cases.
She was doing the right thing and staying away from others.
As an American state declares an emergency. Democrats campaigning with confidence in South Carolina.
I think I'm going to do well here.
Well, I think you're going to make me the next president of the United States.
How tonight's state primary could influence voters across the U.S. And she rocks. The Canadian student wowing the science world with her astronomical accomplishments.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with breaking news tonight from Ethiopia. Global News has confirmed a group of volunteers and staff with the Alberta-based charity Canadian Humanitarian is being detained in Ethiopia. Liam Nixon is tracking this Global News exclusive from our Lethbridge newsroom tonight. Liam?
Yes, Robin, Global Affairs is aware and has consular officials on the ground now working to ensure the well-being of the 13 detainees. Now, originally there were 18 Canadians being held, but Global News has confirmed that 5 were released on Friday. Canadian humanitarian spokesperson Justin Steed says there are now those 13 detainees, 3 staff members and 10 volunteers, and they're being held at a police station in the city of Gondar, 600 kilometers north of the capital Addis Ababa. 2 Ethiopian staff are also currently being held. Steed says the group is being investigated on allegations they were accused of practicing medicine without permission and had dispensed expired medication. Now, in a statement issued to Global News, Steed says, in part, just like all of our trips, our team and organization followed all necessary steps and protocols to ensure our group had all permits needed to provide medical support and care while in Ethiopia. While we cannot comment on the specifics of the expiry of the medication, we can say with confidence that all medicine and care offered by our team was safe. It goes on to say, in collaboration with Global Affairs Canada and the Canadian Embassy in Ethiopia, we are working hard to resolve this as quickly as possible, ensure the fair and humanitarian treatment of our team in accordance with internationally recognized laws, and expedite their safe return to Canada. Canadian Humanitarian is a non-political organization that has sent hundreds of volunteers to Ethiopia over the last 15 years. Steed says the organization does not engage in any activity outside of their humanitarian efforts. And this is actually a long weekend in Ethiopia, so the detainees aren't expected to be back in court until at least Tuesday. Robin?
Global's Liam Nixon in Lethbridge, Alberta. Let's bring in our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes, what are your government sources saying about this case?
Well, Robin, just 2 weeks after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau returned home from a warm and fuzzy visit with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, these Canadians find themselves detained. And tonight, the Canadian government is confirming they are aware of the detention, although they wouldn't give us a lot of details because there are privacy rules. They did say that the Canadians who have been detained are receiving full consular access. We also talked to and received a statement from Rob Oliphant. He's the Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs, which means it's his job in Justin Trudeau's government to help Canadians who are in trouble overseas. He said something interesting in addition to confirming that they were aware of the Canadians' detention and that they are getting access to and help from the embassy. He said thus far the Ethiopian government has been open and cooperative. So that may give some hope to those who are concerned about the status of these Canadians. We also spoke with an international affairs expert who has worked with UNICEF in the past as well as other large international organizations about the use of expired medications and whether that would be highly unusual. Here's what he had to say.
I consider Ethiopia one of the more developed African nations, and I understand that it had to do with them not being properly registered, but also the factor was using expired pharmaceuticals. I can tell you that from working with UNICEF and for a short while for WHO, the World Health Organization, I have seen actually expired medication used quite widely, but in very remote areas.
Now, Robin, that recent visit from Prime Minister Trudeau may be helpful in this situation. The Ethiopian and Canadian governments agreed that they wanted to do more trade together and that Canada wanted to do more to help Ethiopia. The Prime Minister of Ethiopia is Abiy Ahmed. He is seen as a progressive who has tried to move the country away from its past with human rights abuses. In fact, while it is still illegal to be gay in Ethiopia, he has been moving forward, so much so that he received the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts on international security last year. That relationship may help here. Here's what our expert had to say about where things stand between Canada and Ethiopia.
Relations between Canada and Ethiopia are very good. Canada has quite a big presence there in a number of ways, not only diplomatically, but also in terms of trade and investment. So I think it should be a fairly smooth process. There are a lot worse governments on the African continent than in Ethiopia, and although the country has faced some allegations of human rights abuses, that sort of thing, things work pretty well there for the most part.
So, Robin, obviously we will be staying tuned, but the Canadian government is aware of the situation, a relatively good relationship between Canada and Ethiopia, and a good relationship between the two prime ministers, which might help here if needed. Robin?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. The world is scrambling to stop the spread of COVID-19. More and more cases are popping up in countries far from the epicenter of the outbreak. Tonight, there are more than 85,000 confirmed cases around the world. More than 2,000 people have died, mostly in China. But the scare is how quickly cases are multiplying. At least 56 countries now have confirmed cases of COVID-19. Iran has the world's highest death toll outside of China, and cases spiked again today. In the U.S., the man in Washington state has died from the virus, prompting the governor to declare an emergency. Here in Canada, a woman in her 60s who traveled from Tehran to Vancouver has contracted the illness. There are 20 confirmed cases in our country, and as David Aiken reports, right now, it's all about slowing the spread.
Morning. My name's Adrian Dix.
A Saturday morning press conference, a new confirmed case of COVID-19.
It's a significant situation. Obviously, there are Canadians now in Quebec, in Ontario, and in British Columbia who have tested positive.
And a common link to all the Canadian cases, the infected patients had recently traveled, often to Iran.
This demonstrates how the situation is evolving around the world, and how our response has to continue to evolve.
But in the United States, at least 4 cases have been confirmed with no travel connection. Evidence, authorities say, of person-to-person local transmission. And in Washington state, the first COVID-19 death. The Trump administration announced new travel restrictions on those coming from Iran and warned all Americans not to travel to certain parts of Italy or South Korea. New federal funds will also be made available to state and local health authorities for testing, containment, and treatment.
We've taken the most aggressive actions to confront the coronavirus. They are the most aggressive taken by any country.
But the president's claim is an arguable point. The province of Ontario, for example, has administered more tests than have been done in all of the United States. Same thing in BC, where 1,000 individuals have already been tested.
We test some individuals multiple times, so that's 1,425 tests, which is well over twice as many have been done in the entire United States.
Early and comprehensive testing is one of the key ways public health authorities can contain transmission of the disease.
It is a concern that they don't have the testing available in the States yet. It all has to be done in Atlanta.
Meanwhile, some frontline healthcare workers are pressing the Public Health Agency of Canada to improve the protocol used when assessing potential COVID-19 patients. They want to be issued respirators in addition to visors and surgical masks.
We need to talk about the precautionary principle, which is simple. When the science is not clear, we have to have the best protection.
Now, whether it's President Trump or Canada's chief public health officials, they all say the risk to public health remains low. But there is work being done in Canada and elsewhere to learn more about the virus, its incubation period, and how it gets transmitted from person to person. And that work is important to keep the risk low. Robin?
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thanks, David. A third day of talks is underway between hereditary chiefs and government ministers. They're trying to reach a resolution over a natural gas pipeline running through Wet'suwet'en territory in northern BC. Canada's Crown Indigenous Relations Minister says the relationship between Indigenous people and the government needs to improve, but it's complex.
It's 150 years of broken promises and of cynicism, and that is completely understandable about will the government do what they said they're going to do.
The ministers wouldn't get into specifics about the meeting, but they will say the talks are constructive and productive. The U.S. has signed a peace deal with the Taliban aimed at ending the war in Afghanistan, America's longest-running war. The U.S. and its NATO allies went into Afghanistan in 2001 in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Today's historic agreement was signed by chief negotiators from the Taliban, Afghanistan's government, and the U.S. Under the new peace deal, America will withdraw all of its forces over the next 14 months. But it depends on the Taliban meeting on its commitments to prevent terrorism, renounce al-Qaeda, and stop any group from using Afghan soil to plot attacks on the U.S. and its allies.
Today is an historic day for the United States of America and the American people. Today we have taken a decisive step toward peace, real peace in Afghanistan. To the Afghan people, this is your moment. Wars have tortured your country since 1979. No more violence, no more chaos.
The war in Afghanistan was Canada's longest-running war, too. The last 84 Canadian soldiers left the country in March of 2014, ending Canada's 12-year military presence in Afghanistan. Another flood of refugees and migrants from Syria is headed toward Europe. Turkey, already hosting millions of Syrian refugees, has relaxed border controls, saying the refugees are now the world's problem. Today, Greek police fired tear gas at groups of migrants throwing stones on its border with Turkey. Thousands of refugees gathered trying to cross. Nearly 1 million refugees and migrants crossed from Turkey to Greece's islands in 2015, setting off a crisis over immigration in Europe. It all comes amid a military escalation in Syria's Idlib province. Turkey pounded soldiers of the Syrian regime Friday. It's retaliation for Syrian airstrikes that killed 33 Turkish soldiers. The Syrian military offensive, backed by Russian airstrikes, has emptied entire towns. Close to 1 million people have fled their homes. The presidents of Turkey and Russia spoke by phone Friday. The two will reportedly meet in Moscow next week in an effort to prevent an all-out war. It's decision day for Democrats in South Carolina. Coming up, the latest state to vote in a primary. Plus, finding 17 new planets and counting. A Canadian university student's remarkable track record. On this Saturday night in South Carolina, voters are on pins and needles. That's where the Democratic Party is holding its latest primary, and the ballots are being tallied tonight. Jennifer Johnson looks at how these results could be a big factor in how the rest of this race for the presidential nomination plays out.
All eyes are on former Vice President Joe Biden as he banks on a win in South Carolina to jumpstart his campaign going into Super Tuesday. Biden believes a critical win will lead to victories in several other states that hold votes March 3rd.
I think I'm going to do well here, and I think that's going to put me in a position to do well in North Carolina and Alabama and other states.
Polls in South Carolina opened early, and there was a steady stream of voters ready to cast their ballots, some still undecided.
I'm in a really big dilemma about what I'm going to do.
But some experts believe South Carolina's diverse population will help undecided voters make their decisions next Tuesday.
South Carolina is really the first primary in the nation that really reflects the base of the Democratic Party, largely African-American voters.
As a new Fox News poll shows every Democratic candidate beating President Donald Trump in November, the president also campaigned in South Carolina Friday night.
So who is easier to beat? Crazy Bernie or Sleepy Joe?
The COVID-19 crisis becoming a campaign issue, as the president called it the Democrats' new hoax. Current Democratic frontrunner Bernie Sanders fired back.
One might think that in the midst of a major health care crisis, the President of the United States would be assembling doctors and scientists and researchers, not Donald Trump.
Sanders headed to Super Tuesday State, Massachusetts to campaign, while others still push for a strong showing in South Carolina.
Well, I think you're going to make me the next president of the United States.
But all the candidates have their sights on next week, with voters casting ballots in big states like Texas and California. 14 states will hold votes on Tuesday, and the candidates are hoping the wins will be split up, putting the brakes on Bernie Sanders' momentum. Robin?
Jennifer Johnson in Washington. Still ahead, animal experts sound the alarm on preventing the next outbreak.
You're watching Global National.
From MERS to SARS, H1N1 to COVID-19, the epidemics all started with animals. The diseases eventually spread to humans, and tonight experts warn that until the focus shifts to prevention, there's no stopping the next outbreak. Reggie Cicchini explains.
As COVID-19 escalates into a global emergency,
this is no joke.
Animal welfare experts are sounding an alarm that enough isn't being done to stop future outbreaks.
This issue has elevated to the issue of public health, biosecurity, national security, and global economy.
This novel coronavirus traces its origins to interactions between humans and animals in a so-called wet market in central China, where wildlife, both dead and alive, is sold and traded.
I saw this billboard which has 70 species and over 100 items for sale.
These animals are often caged and stressed, making them susceptible to infections, increasing the chances for human transmission.
We are accessing emerging viruses as we get more in contact with these animal species.
COVID-19 is believed to have links to the pangolin, a protected species in China whose scales and meat often wind up on the black market. To slow down the spread, China has temporarily banned trading and consuming wildlife, including cats and dogs. It did the same after SARS, but these bans may not work.
There are a lot of loopholes allowing people basically to farm wildlife to put onto the market.
And that makes preventing these diseases from emerging in the first place an almost impossible task.
Unless we change those cultural practices of people eating wild animals and coming in contact with them on a regular basis in their natural setting, we will always have the potential for new outbreaks.
Recent epidemics have ties to the consumption of wild animals and the encroachment of humans on wild habitats. Eating and selling bushmeat led to a deadly Ebola outbreak in 2013. The same year, H7N9 or bird flu was linked to live poultry markets in China.
In nature and wild animals, there's a myriad of different pathogens circulating all the time. And people are now going into new environments and getting exposed directly that way, or we're bringing wild animals into a domestic setting.
Experts worry the more wildlife is exploited for economic gain, the more chances there are for health crises to emerge.
The problem here is that we focus our efforts after the disease emerges in humans.
Meaning the cycle of virus transmission from animals to people becomes harder to predict and stop. Reggie Cicchini, Global News.
Up next, the star student who made an amazing discovery. To join the Centenarian Club, you have to be 100 years old. But a Toronto man is in a unique situation on this February 29th. Bob Wood jokes that he is celebrating his 25th birthday. He's one of roughly 5.3 million leap year babies around the world. And on this special milestone birthday, he received a special message.
Justin Trudeau thought you were very special too.
And that's not the only piece of paper this senior is celebrating.
Seatbelt is on. Back up.
I had to go and get my license renewed. I got it.
Happy birthday, Bob, and to all the other leaplings, as they're called. Their day only gets added every 4 years to make up for the extra hours it takes the Earth to orbit the sun beyond the 365 days in a calendar year. Students are often told to shoot for the stars, but one from Vancouver has gone above and beyond that. The 26-year-old has discovered 17 new planets, thousands of light years away. And as Nadia Stewart explains, is just the latest accomplishment on her remarkable resume.
Amidst a sea of students, Michelle Kunimoto blends in on campus. But the UBC physics and astronomy PhD candidate is known for making extraordinary discoveries. Her latest is no exception.
As part of my PhD dissertation, I did a search of about 200,000 stars that were observed by NASA's Kepler mission. And as a result of that search, I rediscovered about 4,000 of the known Kepler planets, in addition to 17 new exoplanet candidates.
By all accounts, it's a remarkable discovery. Exoplanets exist outside of the solar system, thousands of light years away.
Engine start, 1-0, and liftoff of the Delta II rocket with Kepler.
It all started when Kunimoto began digging through data from NASA's 2009 Kepler mission. Over the course of 9.5 years, the Space Telescope helped researchers find 2,681 planets, to be exact. Which is why Kunimoto's discovery of 17 new exoplanets is garnering so much attention. But she says one revelation is particularly noteworthy.
This one that I mentioned about the potentially rocky planet in the habitable zone, this has really important implications for the search for life in the universe, and also helps us understand the potential for exoplanet habitability.
Kepler was so sensitive that we started finding smaller and smaller planets.
This was always the aim of the mission, but NASA could not have predicted that years later, a PhD student in Vancouver would mine their data, her research landing her on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in 2017. Kunimoto's latest discovery was published in the Astronomical Journal.
Well, this has definitely been a labor of love.
We'll just have to wait and see what Kunimoto's next big discovery is. Nadia Stewart, Global News.
What a remarkable woman. That is Global National for this Saturday. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is White Rock, British Columbia. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.